the country could end up in divorce. And I think divorce requires war. And I think war hasn't happened yet because Hezbollah is in control. There's no competition like there was in the 1970s. The PLO had a fierce opposition that almost won the initial battles. Kataib was training in the 1970s. We don't have a viable militia-like force that's training, and idiots that suggest the Lebanese forces is a militia, they're the ones that are ideological. I think they're misinformed fundamentally. But later, if Hezbollah's security grip weakens, if the Syrians wiggle their way back in, if Lebanese parties do take up security measures, divorce could happen. And if that's the fait accompli, is our whole discussion tonight, this back and forth, is it perhaps acknowledging that at the end of the day, what is happening to this country is less identity and religion and more war? That we've been stuck in endless war for too long.
I mean, first of all, let's make clear, I'm calling for federalism, not for divorce.
Of course.
I'm just talking about divorce to answer your question.
I meant it more like if that,
yeah. I mean, divorce could happen peacefully. I mean, in Czechoslovakia does not exist anymore, right? Because people voted to go their separate ways. So if we are going to think about divorce, one way to do divorce is not necessarily through war. Why not give every community the choice? Do you want to live in a united Lebanon, or do you want to have your own separate Lebanon? That's one way. I mean, if a community chooses to have its own country, then that's how divorce could happen. Would that be sad? I think what would be really sad was more violence. If divorce is the way to avoid more violence in the future, then no, divorce would not be sad. Again, I don't see the fact that Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots are no longer living in a united Cyprus. I don't see it as a tragedy. In my mind, that it would have been a tragedy had they been fighting one another over and over and over again. That would be a tragedy because people die that way. But the fact that you have, Muslim Turks living on one side of the island and Christian Greeks living on the other side of the island, and no wars, and everybody taking on it, I don't see that as a tragedy. In 1995, the Quebecois, the French minority in Canada, were given the choice to leave or to stay in Canada. 51% chose to stay, 49% chose to leave. Had it been the other way around, we would have ended up with a new country called Quebec. And I don't see why that would have been a disaster. So eventually, and again, I'm just answering your question. If we end up with no Lebanon, smaller Lebanons, but living peacefully, then that would not be a tragedy. The true tragedy, and this is what I fear most, and this, by the way, what may end up being the case, neither federalism nor divorce nor a functioning centralized state, nothing.
Paralysis until death.
Ad infinitum. Yeah. And that could happen for years and years and decades. Remember Somalia. Remember Yemen. I mean, I could think of case studies where you ended up in a country stuck in a kind of more or less civil war or dysfunctioning state for decades and decades and decades on end. And this, I mean, if we're talking about what would be truly sad, in my mind, that scenario would be the saddest scenario of all, and everything else is debatable.
Almost like a permanently failed state, where you have Puntland in Somalia, sort of this odd autonomous region, but it's not exactly shining.
I mean, I don't remember, so I cannot quote it 100%, but it's from Orwell, 1984. I think it says, I took a look at the future and it's somebody's foot that is marked on somebody's face, something like that. I'm quoting that very badly. But I took a look at the future and it's just somebody's foot crushing the head of somebody else. This is how 1984 ends. I worry that this could be us. I mean, the country doesn't matter for anyone, really. I mean, the West doesn't really care about what's going on here. Iran is extremely powerful. It's likely to remain powerful for some time at least.
Yeah.
Syria is in chaos. Iraq is in chaos. The whole region is in flame. We can be stuck like that for years and decades, unless we carve a place within that chaos that would allow us to have some semblance of a life. And that's like Kurdistan. That's the example I'm really thinking about a lot lately. I mean, Iraq is still dysfunctioning. Iran is still very powerful. The Hashd al-Shabi is still there. But the Kurds are living somewhat decently.
This is in no way trying to play a trick on you. On the contrary, it's quoting you. That to you would be Mount Lebanon.
That to me would be some kind of free zone. That is whose frontiers are yet to be defined, but that would be definitely free from Hezbollah, Amal, and anybody who supports Hezbollah and Amal. So that could be pretty much the rest of the country. That could be Mount Lebanon and Tripoli. That could be only Mount Lebanon, depending on what people want. I mean, I don't have an exact solution for this, but I do believe that it's time to think roughly along these lines. Sticking with the March 14th dream of a powerful, functioning, centralized state, that's an illusion. And this is where my anti-romanticism kicks in. That's an illusion. That's not going to happen. It's a dangerous way to think about things, and we need to put that behind us and start thinking along the lines that the Federalists are suggesting.
So the local solution, born from a local expression, there's no international engagement here. This is a Lebanese idea. It's borrowing from other examples which you described that are peaceful ways forward, not violent way forward. They're meant to alleviate. They're meant to bring more harmony. Everything that Hicham said, and adding to what I said earlier, which is the direction could be heading to partition and divorce, and also emphasizing that's not what Hicham is saying.
It is. I mean, he's talking about partition. He's calling it federalism. I mean, Kurdistan is partition. It's not federalism.
Kurdistan is not its own country. Iraq is the country.
The Kurds think of it as partition, and you shouldn't be ashamed of saying it's part. I'm saying the whole region is in a mess, and there has to be, because of certain bad actors, and the whole region could be a much better place, including Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf, and Yemen, and all that. The whole region could go into a much better place. And I unrealistically think that, in your words, Yani, we should think of that. And I also think that admitting that the region is going to be like this forever, and that we can carve ourselves a little enclave to live separately from it, is not realistic. And on top of that, half the people in that enclave are pro-Hezbollah. Yani the Aounists are pro-Hezbollah. You should hear them in their honeymoon talks, muqawama, and they don't even they look at the language, look at the how can these are political opinions. They're not ethnically or religiously determined political ideas. No, I have people in my family who are Aounist. It's not, and they are pro-Hezbollah.
You have the
you cannot live off. You cannot live separate. You cannot create an enclave in a swamp. And think we can survive without having at least the aspirations of making the region a better place, which a lot of people do, and a lot of people on every side, and we're not the only ones who want a better life.
See, the
Hicham, you have the last word.
There's a dual problem with what you're suggesting. First of all, if the situation continues for another 30 years or 40 years, not a lot of the other communities will still be here. I mean, people are leaving in droves.
It's different.
You don't seem to take that into consideration, and I find that mind-blowing. That's one thing. The other thing, again, I don't see what's so wrong about Kurdistan. I mean, in Kurdistan, the economy is doing relatively well. Obviously, there's the oil factor and all that. The security is doing relatively well. The Kurds are, they can go to school and learn in their own language, which is good and legitimate. So they have their own enclave within the confines of a dysfunctional state. And I don't see, what's so morally right or politically right. Let us say Kurdistan did not exist. Let us say the Kurds were not autonomous within Iraq, and they would be suffering just as like people in Basra are suffering right now. What's so good about that? I mean, what's so romantic? I mean, I don't see anything good about that. So yes, actually, you can have a kind of semi-functioning or somewhat functioning enclave within the confine of a dysfunctional state. And again, while that would be an imperfect solution for what we're going through, I would suggest to prefer imperfect solutions that are real, that could work. Rosy solutions that are basically, again, completely divorced from social reality because they are built more in Arabic, there's a term which I like a lot, raghbawiyya. It comes from raghba. I have a raghba in seeing that happening, thus this is happening. I think raghbawiyya is a very, very dangerous way of looking at things. And I suggest we avoid it. I'll just end here.